Now that summer is almost over and we're heading into autumn, it's time to rewatch one of our cozy shows of the season, Gilmore Girls. A show that puts Lorelai and Rory Gilmore at the center of every episode. It brings relatable, sometimes glamorized issues into a perfect town where nothing can ever go wrong. Until you get to the final episode of season 4 and you're faced with the unthinkable.
Well, aren't you glad that it happened with someone who's good and really loves me?
But he's married.
You don't understand the situation.
Is he still married?
Yes, but
Then I understand the situation.
it's not.
The affair between Rory and Dean has long been discussed by fans of the show as one of the pivotal moments in Rory Gilmore's life. Many people say it changed the perception of her, but this argument is mainly used to explain why, in their eyes, Rory sucks and how she's the worst part of an otherwise whimsical show about daily life. So, did the affair with Dean ruin the personality of a remarkable girl heading towards an impeccable road to success? Or was Rory and Dean's situation far more layered and complex than many people think? Today we're going to dig a little deeper in their relationship and what might have driven them to it, hoping to find a more nuanced answer about this plotline. Rory and Dean's affair, a pivotal moment where Rory loses her virginity to Dean in her room and is later confronted by Lorelai about it, takes place in the season 4 finale of Gilmore Girls. At the time, Rory was in her first year at Yale and Dean was recently married to Lindsay, the girl he studied dating in high school right after he broke up with Rory. Although the affair happens in that episode, the show had already been hinting at their growing closeness. So here's a brief timeline of when this situation begins to develop and how it unfolds. This season, Lorelai decides to open her own inn, and Dean joins the construction crew working on it. This not only creates the opportunity for him to occasionally bump into Rory, but also gives the town, and by extension the audience, a glimpse into his marriage with Lindsay. And by newlywed standards, it doesn't look very good, but we're gonna talk about that later. In season 4, episode 14, Rory hits an emotional breaking point. After a brief re-encounter with Jess, who basically ghosted her before that was even a concept, a discouraging review of an assignment she was surely she'd excel on, and a lack of communication and support from Lorelai due to their busy schedules, Rory finally breaks down in Dean's arms. This was completely unplanned on her part because she had been looking for Lorelai but found Dean instead. From that point on, Rory and Dean begin having small conversations at the inn. For Rory, this chat seems casual, but for Dean, they are anything but casual. Luke notices this in more than one occasion. Being the only one who knows, Dean married Lindsay while still deeply in love with Rory. During spring break, Rory runs into Madeline and Louise, who ask about Dean. Rory tells them he's married and that they're just friends. Louise bluntly says the marriage won't last because Dean is too in love with Rory. Later, after visiting Rory at Yale, Dean tells her he plans to take a 6-month break from school to get his and Lindsay's finances in order. But Rory reacts strongly, reminding him that she had encouraged him to go to college in the first place. Ironically, the words she uses to criticize him echo what Lorelai had once said to her when she wanted to take time off from Yale. But we'll save that discussion for another video. After learning why Dean temporarily quit school, Rory makes harsh judgments about his decision and by extension about Lindsay. She mentioned this to Lane while grocery shopping at Dosie's, only for Lindsay, who happens to be there, to overhear what they're talking about. After a brief argument, Dean and Rory patch things up afterwards, discussing Lindsay's reaction to what she heard in the supermarket. But then Dean tells Rory he doesn't want her talking to him anymore, something neither of them truly wants. Already, that's a red flag for both of them, for obvious reasons I'll get into later. At one point, Emily sets Rory up with a guy who turns out to be a jerk. Stranded at the bar without money or a ride back to campus, Rory calls Dean to come rescue her. He drives her back to Yale, but just as she's about to confront him about what he saw with her instead of being with Lindsay at home, Jess unexpectedly shows up. Rory asks Dean to leave and their conversation is cut short. The next day, Rory visits Lane and they both compare Dean and Jess. And Rory admits she might have ruined a good opportunity with Dean, who, in her own words, had always been good to her.
He really loved you.
Yeah, I think I really blew it there, you know? I didn't appreciate it.
She goes to the inn to talk to him, but Dean is furious that she blew him off for Jess the night before. They argue about it while getting dangerously close, only to be interrupted before things go too far. Finally, after Rory returns home to grab some CDs for the inn, Dean shows up at her house to continue their earlier conversation. He tells her that things with Lindsay aren't working, and then they finally sleep together. I recently watched Mina Leigh's most recent video called The Public Spectacle of Cheating, in which she talks about how cheating can be as impactful in our relationships as it is in the parasocial relationships we have with others, like celebrities, characters in movies or books, or in this case, TV. In part of this essay, she also discusses the variety of reasons that lead anyone to cheat. It's not just about wanting intimacy, either emotional or sexual, with a different partner, and it's not just about wanting to harm the person we're cheating on. In some cases, it can be far more complicated than just the act itself. And I will dare to say that for Rory and Dean, there are a variety of circumstances that made them get to this point. By the way, this is going to be one of many warnings I give in this video. I am not condoning their behavior because I find it reprehensible myself, but it's good to take the time to understand what makes someone reach a point like this. Comparing both situations, we can boil down the root of their affair to two causes: dissatisfaction with their current circumstances and a remaining emotional attachment between the two of them. An attachment that was initially dormant but was slowly reignited in the plotline I described previously. Rory's dissatisfaction can be traced back to different situations: the lifestyle change between high school and college, and her difficulty adapting to the expectations put on her both socially and academically. The academic pressure usually weighs more heavily on her, but the societal expectations of college also have quite an impact on her. Let's remember when Paris told Rory that she has had a slow year for dating, especially compared to season 1 to 3, where she was constantly being tested and sought after in that area, mainly by Dean, Tristan, and then Jess. As a contrast, what did she have in season 4? A failed attempt at asking a guy out, an embarrassing date, and then, well, the affair with Dean. Even if it's not explicitly mentioned in the show, unlike Lorelai, Rory has a hard time adapting to uncertainty. This either A, makes her go back to familiar patterns that make her more comfortable and safe, or B, makes her act in erratic ways that completely defy the responsible and sensible person we know her to be. And we could say that the affair with Dean is a combination of both A and B. She felt unsafe, unstable, and unsuccessful in almost everything she did in college, and besides Stars Hollow and Lorelai, she found comfort in what was most familiar to her, which is Dean.
I need to talk to my mom, because I just don't know what to do.
It's okay.
Dean's situation is not that different from Rory's. Even though it may seem so from the outside, he was also being pushed down by expectations. In his case, these expectations came not only from the rash decision he made by marrying Lindsay right after high school, but also from her parents meddling in most aspects of their relationship. Lindsay's parents always find a way to be in their place. Her mom's helping out with cooking and cleaning, and her father fixing everything in the house, basically pushing Dean out of his own home, as he explained to Luke when he found him in the arcade. This is not openly explained either, but it seems that not only Dean was too young to marry, but Lindsay was as well. Even though she now lived with Dean, she was still always asking her parents to get involved in the most basic aspects of their relationship.
You know, Lindsay and her mom kind of like me out of the way when they're cleaning up. They kick you out, huh? And her dad's over all the time fixing things. Lindsay's got this list for him to do, and great.
And beyond the issues already mentioned, Dean was balancing school, work, and this new gigantic step in his life that already placed great demands for him. For example, he planned to quit school for 6 months so he could work more and achieve his plan of buying a house for Lindsay. It was incredibly ambitious for a 19-year-old, but it was also going to set him back in his personal and professional development. Rory was very vocal about this decision, but at the same time, she wasn't considering that Dean wasn't in the same position she was. Her only goal and responsibility up until that point was school, while Dean was overloaded with everything he had decided to take on at such a young age. Of course, after being faced with all this weight on his shoulders, he was going to try to relieve the pressure by doing the same as Rory, going back to someone who represented a happier and a more carefree time in his life. That someone was Rory. And to have a better understanding of why they both found their time together so comforting, we have to go back to their relationship. Rory and Dean were the many firsts in each other's lives. We don't have much information about Dean's romantic background since he's new in town when we meet him, but for Rory, this would be the first time she showed a remarkable interest in a guy. They were both head over heels for each other from the moment they first met, and in the first season they continued to take slow but progressive steps that eventually led them to become officially boyfriend and girlfriend. Dean was Rory's first kiss, first date, first boyfriend, and he even gave her her first car, which if it isn't already an indication of Dean's feelings for her, then nothing else is. He also became her first heartbreak, but this was more related to the intensity of Dean's feelings, or better said, the lack of security Rory had in hers, and her initial apprehension about using the word love with him. There could be many reasons for this, but I'd point mainly to Lorelai's influence and the lack of stability in the romantic area. Rory's and Dean's first breakup, although something that could have been solved with a conversation, was necessary to establish certain dynamics in their relationship. Dynamics that later will become the reason Dean turned into such a disliked character for a lot of people. Dean loves Rory. I would dare to say a little too much. He calls Rory all the time, wants to spend time with her, like a lot, and expected Rory to move at the same speed he was going. That is already a recipe for disaster, not only with Rory, but with anyone he dates. From his relationship with Rory and later with Lindsay, it's safe to assume that Dean falls deeply and wants to move quickly. That is why he said, "I love you" to Rory after only 3 months of dating, and why he married and then divorced Lindsay in less than a year after breaking up with Rory. But being needy is not his only issue. It's also the confrontational way he handles rejection that makes it difficult for Rory to have a relationship with him. The way he reacted after she didn't say "I love you" back was a huge red flag for what was to come. It showed that he could be as sweet and kind as he could be bitter and vindictive. Let's not forget that both times he broke up with Rory, he did it very publicly. Once in front of Jess and the whole town.
And if you don't like it, then just ignore me and pay attention to your boyfriend.
Sorry, she can't. I'm not her boyfriend anymore.
What?
And the second time in front of Logan and the entire Yale alumni party.
I don't belong here. Not anymore.
Dean.
You look good.
This side of him shows up in many situations, but especially when another guy is involved or competing for Rory's affection. First Tristan, then Jess, and later Logan. Which brings me to the next point. Rory is either a magnet for misunderstandings and pushy boys, or she doesn't draw her boundaries clearly enough for them to respect them. Either way, it seems like every guy who approaches her uses her as a power play to dominate another guy around her. We saw this with all of them. Tristan did it to Dean, Jess did it to Dean, then Dean did it to Jess, and Logan did it to Jess too. This puts Rory at the center of uncomfortable situations she never asked for. For example, the many times Jess forced his presence into Rory's life, which caused her several issues with Dean, or the way Tristan treated Dean at the Chilton dance, for example. In many of these cases, like with Tristan, I believe it was accidental, but it still fed Dean's insecurities, which was already a big problem for him. Still, Rory drew a boundary with Tristan, letting him know that she had no interest in him and she had a boyfriend. However, the arrival of Jess in Stars Hollow made all these problems worse. Dean noticed right away that not only did Jess have feelings for Rory, but Rory also had feelings for Jess. So he was completely justified in his suspicions, even if the way he showed it wasn't the most mature. On the other hand, there's Rory. organized and meticulous in almost every area of her life except her love life. I don't blame her for taking her time to tell Dean she loved him in season 1. Her reasons to slow down were valid. She even said she didn't want to repeat what happened to her mother by going too fast, and that's a sensible answer. The issue begins when Jess comes into town. Rory starts getting closer to him, and it's obvious that he likes her. Obvious to everyone but her, because Rory has a habit of being oblivious to the feelings of the men around her. The problem comes when she finally realizes she also has feelings for Jess, when she kisses him, but continues to date Dean, leading him on and creating a very close overlap between the two relationships. And I'm aware that in real life this kind of overlap happens more often than we think, but after Jess entered her life, Rory started treating Dean like an afterthought. I could say this was the immaturity of her age, since she was between the ages of 16 and 19 while dating Dean, but then it happens again with Paul when she's 32, so in a sense we can't just blame immaturity anymore. Just because she's older doesn't mean she's wiser. Instead, we can also point to a sense of entitlement Rory has been criticized for over the years, and I'd argue that this behavior shows up more in her romantic life than anywhere else. That said, in spite of her shortcomings as a couple, Rory and Dean did share beautiful and life-changing moments together. The kiss at the supermarket, the first dance, their 3-month anniversary, and the moment he gave her a car, after which Rory admitted she had never been happier. And although accidental and morally wrong, their first time sleeping together was sweet and they clearly had a lot of love for each other. And in spite of the reasons that led them to that moment, there was still a genuine feeling at the core of it. Unfortunately, this glimpse of the past wasn't enough to sustain a relationship that started, or better said, restarted, on the wrong foot. Right after the first time together, Lorelai catches them and confronts Rory about the reality of what they did. Rory refuses to acknowledge how serious it was, focusing mainly on how important it felt for her and how great it was with Dean.
She lets him quit school and work himself to death.
No, Rory, you can't be one of those girls who blames the wife for forcing the husband to cheat.
He wasn't cheating.
He was cheating, Rory. He was cheating, and you were cheating with him.
Lorelai brings her back to reality, forcing her to face not only what they are doing now, but also the way she treated Dean in the past. Lorelai's disapproval upsets Rory, who leaves the house to call Dean. I would assume to find some sort of comfort and consolation and to keep denying what happened, only to have his phone answered by Lindsay, which is a bitter confirmation that she really was the other woman. Lorelai and Rory get into an argument over this issue, and then Rory goes to Europe with her grandmother, leaving Dean without saying a word. While in Europe, and after she and Lorelai reconcile, Rory asks her mother to give a letter to Dean. That letter is later found by Lindsay, leading to a huge and very public fight with Dean that the entire town knows about. No longer after, while walking in the town square, Lorelai and Rory run into Lindsay and her mom. Lindsay's mom berates Rory and Lorelai steps in to defend her daughter. And I have to make a small note here. Notice how it's the moms who are arguing, not the daughters. Both Rory and Lindsay are very publicly being pitted against each other, but they're not fighting their own fight, which in my opinion makes the whole argument even worse. Lorelai later asks Rory what was in the letter, and Rory says that she was ending things with Dean for good. That was supposed to be the final note until Rory goes back to school, and when Marty asks her if she's seen anyone, she gets insecure about her relationship status and ends up going back to Dean. They start dating again, but unlike their first time together, this relationship is far more bittersweet for a variety of reasons. First, and most obvious, is the affair. Even though they got what they wanted, the circumstances surrounding their relationship and the opinions of others now weigh heavily on them. They not only have to deal with what happened, but also with the quiet disapproval of Lorelai, the loud disapproval of Luke, which is more a disapproval of Dean altogether, and the fact that they can no longer be together as peacefully as they once were. Now they have to hide to be intimate, and they can't parade the relationship around as they used to, because doing so would be like rubbing it in Lindsay's face, something Dean wants to avoid at all costs, even though Rory seemed oblivious of it.
It would be fun. At the very least, it could be loud.
No, Rory. I don't want to go parading our relationship all over town.
I didn't say...
I don't need to rub Lindsay's nose in it any more than I already have, okay?
Second, and just as important, is how different their lives had become. Dean was still very much rooted in Star's hollow life, working at Dosey's or as a contractor. It was never clear if he quit school, but I assume he did. And meanwhile, Rory was at Yale. They were heading in completely different directions, and the weight of the affair only made things harder. On top of that, as soon as her grandparents found out she was back with Dean, they threw a Yale alumni party that quote-unquote coincidentally included only men. So Rory could meet a better prospect. Dean came to pick Rory from that party, only to see her surrounded by guys, dressed elegantly in a fancy house that symbolized a world far removed from his. Suddenly, the easier relationship he thought he had chosen over Lindsay turned into one that felt impossible to sustain. And through that last image, Rory coming out of a fancy house in a fancy dress followed by a group of men, Dean saw a threat he chose not to fight. That's when he decided to break up with Rory for the last time.
I don't belong here. Not anymore. Do I?
The perception of this affair marks a clear before and after for fans of the show and the audience in general, especially for those who had become accustomed to the initial image of Rory. Gilmore Girls is a show with an apparently immature mom and an apparently mature daughter share an unshakable bond that we love to watch. But let's emphasize the word apparently, because as I mentioned in my Lorelai video a couple of months ago, Lorelai is not as immature and childish as her demeanor might suggest. And by extension, the same is true for Rory. Rory is initially presented as the gifted, responsible, obsessively organized daughter who, at first glance, seems to keep her mother grounded and even appears more mature than Lorelai herself. But the more you watch the show, the more nuances you uncover in Rory's behavior. Nuances that reveal she can be just as flawed as anyone else, even if she refuses to accept it. Rory has always been told, not just by her mother but by her grandparents and the entire town, that she's a quote-unquote good kid, and she wears that as a badge of honor. But because of that, when she makes mistakes, she tends to handle them in one of two ways. The first is self-punishment. For example, when she skipped Lorelai's graduation to visit Jess in New York, she came back home and instead of being punished by her mother, she punished herself in ways that almost felt excessive compared to the actual mistake.
That's it. I'm grounded for 6 months or 7, and no TV, no stereo, no reading. In fact, take all of my books away from me and lock them up.
Hold on here, you went to New York?
And no magazines either.
The second is denial. When she does something uncharacteristic of her, she goes into full denial mode, pretending nothing happened until she's confronted with the reality of her shortcomings. And in those moments, the quote-unquote good kid who can do no wrong is revealed to be just another flawed human being, a role Rory is not comfortable with. Up until this point, Rory was the show's darling. Everybody loved her, everybody admired her intelligence, her wit, her willpower, her ambitious and organized nature, but above all, they admire how Rory, most of the time, wanted to do the right thing, especially when compared to Lorelai, who was more chaotic, unserious, and spontaneous, which led her to make bigger, messier mistakes than Rory ever did. So you may ask, why are we so much harsher on Rory? Simple. We expect Lorelai to make outlandish mistakes, but we don't expect them from Rory. Her good kid persona became a cage, putting her on a pedestal, and when she inevitably did something that didn't align with that image, she was no longer the aspirational figure the audience saw her as. She became, in the eyes of many, way worse. Whether we admit it or not, we all had high expectations for Rory. Becoming the other woman and in her married ex-boyfriend's life, twice, wasn't part of our plan for her. Rory was the moral compass of the show, and that's exactly why it's so hard for us to understand why she would do something like that. By cheating with a married man, Rory didn't just make a personal mistake. She betrayed the image we had of her. And for failing to meet our expectations, we demand that she pay for it. Or at least that's the perception many fans still hold to this day. That she should have faced harsher consequences. That she should have suffered more for what she did to Lindsay. That she should have stopped things before they went too far. That she should have been cheated on herself so she could feel what Lindsay felt. All of these demands echo the same sentiment. Like Lorelai, the audience expected more from Rory. She was supposed to uphold the idealized, fragile image we had of her, and when she didn't, she became an easy target for blame and resentment. And yes, I know she's a fictional character, but this happens in real life too. We hold our loved ones to impossibly high standards, and when they disappoint us, we judge them more harshly than strangers. We excuse some people's flaws, but not others. Think of cheating scandals in the entertainment industry. When a celebrity commits an indiscretion, the image we had of them shatters, and they instantly become less favored by the public. And more often than not, the public directs its harshest criticism towards the women involved. Once again, this isn't me justifying infidelity or minimizing its effects, but it's worth acknowledging how much of our perception of Rory shifted and how that shift made her an easy target for hate. The sanitized PG nature of Gilmore Girls only magnifies this because what Rory and Dean did is scandalous in Stars Hollow. But in Mad Men, it will be just another Tuesday for Don Draper. Add to that Rory's years of privilege, the unwavering support and occasional enabling of her grandparents, her mother, her friends, and even the whole town. In the eyes of many viewers, Rory had every advantage, and that privilege made her fall from grace even more deserved. She was quote-unquote above us, and therefore she owed us the responsibility to live up to the image we had of her. But overall, is that perception really fair? Having Rory do something like this, although it's morally wrong, actually gave her some depth. She's not just a Mary Sue or a perfect ideal of girlhood. Through situations like this, she became more human and therefore more complex than a lot of people originally thought she was. I personally prefer a character who is capable of experimenting, questioning, and even messing up in ways we normally would not, over one who is always good and can do no wrong. It gives dimension to a story. And through other examples of media, we can clearly see how not giving a character any personal flaws can backfire, especially when we're supposed to see them develop and grow. Through this storyline, we learn that Rory is not perfect. She's actually far from it. But that's a good thing, because it's through their actions that characters make us feel, and most of all, they make us reflect about them and about ourselves in comparison. I'm not saying you should forgive Rory, or that you should take a harsher approach to her wrongdoings. I'm asking you for the opposite. I'm asking you to dissect the situation in a way that allows you to see a loved one, or maybe even yourself, in all of them, and to consciously look inward to understand why these setbacks are so difficult to digest. Perhaps you'll discover that you're holding yourself to an impossible standard. Perhaps you'll realize you've been living with a self-imposed and undeserved guilt. Perhaps you're afraid to see in yourself the behaviors you criticize in others. Or perhaps you're afraid to face your own shortcomings so you don't damage the image you've built of yourself. The best part of these plotlines is that they give us the opportunity to see how a person, real or imaginary, deals with these situations. Do they grow? Do they revert back? Do they rise to the occasion and improve their lives? Or does it have a negative impact that completely derails them? And this is why I personally love flawed characters, because in spite of how they sometimes reveal the embarrassing and unglamorous parts of being human, their experience helps us evolve, question, and imagine situations we may or may not face ourselves at some point in life. At the end of the day, Rory's affair doesn't just add drama to Gilmore Girls. It challenges us as viewers to confront our own expectations of who she's supposed to be. By giving her flaws, the writers stripped away the illusion of perfection and reminded us that even the good kid can fall short. And while that might have disappointed or even angered many fans, it also made Rory more real, more layered, and ultimately more relatable. Because if even she can stumble, then maybe it's okay for us to admit that we can too. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Bye bye!